Welcome everyone to a very special edition of the Super Magical Cup YouTube video series. We have a balance update coming in soon, just announced by Supercell, and I couldn't wait to dive into it. I wanted to talk about how these changes are going to affect the tournament meta, how they're going to change the most common, tournament archetypes and open up maybe new opportunities to play. And of course, I have a very special guest with me, Woody the Mortar Mauler, the leader and founder of Reddit Alpha, and also the most decorated Clash Royale tournament player in history. We've got multiple wins across Reddit clan system tournaments, Super Magical Cups, an unprecedented number, like more than double the top fours of any other player. So if there's anyone who knows Clash Royale tournament play, it's Woody, the man standing right above me. So let's get into these upgrades or these balance changes and see how it's going to affect the game as we know it.
Yeah, I look forward to diving in with you, Rumham, and I think we've got some great material to work with here.
So the first balance update is something that I'm sure the masses are very thrilled about. Royal Giant is getting a huge nerf. Hit speed decreased from 1.7 seconds to 1.5. And while that might seem like, oh, only 0.2 seconds, that's not that much, it really works out to something like a 13% damage reduction over time to the Royal Giant. What do you think about this, Woody?
I think it's a really big change, and it's one that I was really hoping for, gunning for a long time. It's something that players on the ladder have really been expecting in particular, as opposed to tournament players, because Royal Giant just gets so over-leveled because he's a common card, and it's really easy for like a level 10 player to be rocking a level 12 Royal Giant. And the hit speed decrease is going to really be punishing to him, because I think that when players play the Royal Giant, they typically expect to get 4, maybe 5 hits off on that tower with that 6 elixir investment. So with this, we can possibly see a world in which maybe only 3 hits get off on that tower realistically from each 6 elixir push. So I think it's going to be a lot easier to defend against the Royal Giant. He's going to be a lot slower, lumbering, and will hold up to his name Giant, and the way that the original Giant works too.
I'm a big fan of Royal Giant, so I hope this doesn't totally wipe Royal Giant out of the metagame, because he's already not really seen that much in tournament play, not a very popular tournament card, and the Royal Giant's sort of a victim of his own design, because he's, besides being a common, is also both a tank and a damage source. So since most players have to balance between upgrading, say, their Giant and their Musketeer or whatever, their tank and their ranged attacker, Royal Giant is just one card that does both, which is why it's so commonly over-leveled compared to something like Barbarians, right? And I just, I feel bad for the guy, because in tournament play he's so bad, and on the ladder he's so good, and it's kind of sad to see a big nerf come in. Hopefully the archetype remains powerful, but not nearly as oppressive on the ladder. The next update is one that I'm very happy to see. Zap is getting its stun duration reduced from 1 full second to a half second. I think this is pretty key from my standpoint, because Zap already does a fair amount of damage for 2 elixir, but then with a stun, often a lot of extra damage would come in during that 1 second, and you would see Zap being sort of the go-to spell to make any combat interaction go from unfavorable to favorable. I think a shorter stun duration is going to reduce the sort of indirect damage that Zap creates and make it maybe a more fair card and open up opportunities for other spells to get played. What do you think about this?
I agree. Zap used to do no stun damage whatsoever. And so there was not really much utility in using the card. The damage that it offered was pretty negligible. And so dialing back that mechanic that it offered to allow a defender to have a little bit more of a chance for their troops to make an impact after they get zapped will, I think, make the card a little bit more balanced overall. The last card popularity snapshot that I did, I found Zap in 98 of the top 100 leaderboard decks. So I really expect this change to make a bit of a dent in that and hopefully bring it more in line with some of the other spells that are in the game.
And that's right. Your card popularity snapshots on Reddit are some of the most informative posts that are out there in the Clash community. And when 98 out of 100 decks are playing a card, I wonder if this nerf actually might not be enough. Because most people play Zap more to reset the Infernos and other and the reset Sparkies, those sort of things, these big charge ups. I could see the stun duration even going down to like 0.25 seconds and Zap still being a very popular card. So hopefully this is enough to make some balance to it, but I still think Zap is probably a must-play in most decks.
I'd agree with that. I'd also say that Zap is a really high skill cap card, so it's quite difficult to get the maximum value from it. And so it might be a card that Supercell actually likes to have in the game with the mechanic that it has right now, because in order to get the most from it, you have to really know and place it at the exact correct time and spot on the map.
The next change is something that I'm I have a love-hate relationship with Princess, so I'm glad to see them doing something about what I consider to be one of the most meta-impactful cards, but it's hard to say how this is going to play out. Princess is getting its area damage radius decreased by 25%. So what that means is the splash range, the big circle that she hits, is going to be about 25% smaller. That's a pretty significant reduction to the radius. Do you have any idea of how this is going to play out with the Princess? I know you play a lot of Princess in your Siege decks.
Well, we saw the reduction in the area radius for the free spell make a huge drop in the popularity of that card. I don't think that the same thing is going to happen with the Princess. I think that the key interactions that are going to be taking place here is that whenever Princess shoots at a troop that moves very fast, as in goblins, that it's possible that she won't hit the goblin that's in the very front of the pack, and so it'll be easier to counter her with those very fast cards. In addition, we haven't really tested this yet, but it's possible that when a princess is played behind the arena tower and the opponent plays a counter princess to hit the arena tower and to try to splash onto the other princess at the same time, it might be that the area radius damage of the attacking princess is not quite big enough to hit both the tower and the enemy princess at the same time. But we'll have to test that out.
That'll be the key interaction to me. If that changes, where now princesses splash onto a tower doesn't hit the things just adjacent to a tower, that would be a significant nerf to Princess, but I don't think that would ruin her. Another balance change that I'm really excited to see, although I don't think it's going to change too much, is the Ice Wizard getting its hit points decreased by 5%. Ice Wizard is some of the nuttiest hit points to cost in the game. It has more hit points than a 5-cost wizard, and it just seems like it was a little too much for such a powerful defensive card. A 5-point hit point decrease doesn't change any major interactions. It's still going to survive fireballs, still going to survive princesses, and it'll still, of course, die to lightning. But I think this will help a lot in those little edge cases where the Ice Wizard would survive with just a little bit of hit points. As a big Ice Wizard player, does this scare you off of playing Ice Wizard?
Not at all, and I think that the description that you offered of this nerf is pretty accurate. We're not going to see spells suddenly taking the Ice Wizard out like a fireball or anything like that. The mini Pekka does a ton of damage, but I think that the Ice Wizard will still just barely have enough health to creep on out from one hit there. So I think that the Ice Wizard will remain a staple of really slow defensive and especially of siege-based decks that want to get a high elixir efficiency trade against opponents using swarm cards and just anything in general that they need to slow down to get more time for them to defend against.
And the third nerf to a cheap legendary, I'm actually very impressed with Supercell to take a haircut to all 3 of the most popular legendaries. There was some talk for a while that legendaries, were supposed to be overpowered, never going to get nerfed. I never really bought that, but I'm really glad to see that all 3 of them are taking sort of equal nerfs to try to reduce the meta's reliance on all of them. So the miner is getting 2 changes. One is a hit point decrease by 6%. This reverts an earlier buff that occurred a couple balance updates ago where they said, hey, no one's using miner. Here's a 6% hit point buff. Try to use this card more. They're taking that hit point buff back now that everyone knows how good miner is. And then also reverting an accidental buff, returning its deploy time to 1 second. It was accidentally 0.7 seconds from the last balance update to now, so that is getting changed. Do you think that bringing miner back to its release state is going to take it out of the metagame, or do people just know how to use this card and it's a permanent thing we're going to see from here on out?
I think that it'll still be here to stay. This increase in his deploy time was something that had been teased already by Supercell on the official Clash Royale subreddit. The hit point decrease, though, to put him back in line with where he used to be, does kind of make me a little bit sad. I think that his key purpose here is as a tanky unit, and it's good to force the defender to respond to the miner in some way. So reducing his hit points limits the urgency of having to respond to him by deploying troops as a defense. I think that miner really shines as a direct counter to Elixir Collector, and I wish that there were just a second way for players to be able to respond to Elixir Collector beyond just throwing spells or miner at it, since miner is now getting a hit point reduction and a reduction in his deploy time. I just want to make sure that there's still a way to be able to deal with Elixir Collectors, which once again, in the card popularity snapshot that I just did, showed up in over half of the decks and hasn't decreased in popularity whatsoever.
Final note I'll make on Miner is that it actually gets an indirect damage nerf here too, because 6% less hit points will translate to fewer damage to a tower. Like an ignored Miner currently does about 500 damage. Now it might end up doing 450 because it gets one less attack in or something like that. And another, I wouldn't call it surprising, I guess, but a card that we had all sort of forgotten about, Baby Dragon, hasn't been part of the meta for a while, is getting a significant increase. Again, kind of like the Royal Giant, it doesn't seem like much to only have a 2.2 faster attack speed, but this works out to about a 12% damage buff, and that's great for a card that really its only weakness was significantly low sustained damage.
That's right. We haven't seen Baby Dragon in the metagame for a very long time now. I tried it out with a Mortar deck and got completely shut down in the first round of the Super Magical Cup. Didn't have very much success with it and haven't turned back to it since. I think that players who are running a lot of air attacks now might turn back to the Baby Dragon as an alternative tank to the Lava Hound. It doesn't quite get just as much of a specialized role in that it doesn't target buildings and it doesn't really do any one thing particularly well, but the versatility of the unit is something that I think that Supercell is trying to buff up by decreasing the time that it takes for it to get its next attack in. And so maybe it'll do well again, maybe it won't. I guess we'll just have to see where the metagame shifts.
I'd say the most surprising buff of this patch, something that I really didn't expect because I thought the card was pretty playable already, is Dark Prince. Dark Prince is getting a significant damage increase. 7.5% damage is, almost a full level's worth of damage increase. I think a significant damage increase like this allows Dark Prince to maybe go from 5 hitting barbs to 4 hitting barbs, or from 4 to 3, whatever exchanges exist. I'm pretty sure Dark Prince now is going to win a fight that he used to not win.
I think so too, and Supercell has really been trying to push this Dark Prince to happen. They buffed him the last time, but Valkyrie has just remained one of the best AoE ground kind of tanky cards, and I think that the combination of the shield and the charge effect for the Dark Prince make him viable somewhere. He ought to have some spot in the metagame, and I really hope that we get this return of sort of double Prince combinations once again. They would, of course, be punished by those air decks that we were just talking about, but I think that Dark Prince has a spot in the game that is not currently utilized, and I'd like to see more Dark Princes, and I think that this will help a lot.
You had a great match at the last Super Magical Cup with Bakalol, who is top-aided 2 weeks in a row now with the triple charger deck, so he's probably the most successful Dark Prince player recently. I played that deck to a lot of success in tournaments as well, and yeah, Dark Prince is super useful. It's good against Sparky because it has the shield built in. It's good against incoming barbs and other things. I bet you this damage increase is going to make it better against Valkyrie and especially things like Cannon. I think Dark Prince, even with the charge, 3 hits a cannon, so he charges and has to take 2 more swings. This might get it down to like a 2-hit or something like that, to where some of the other common single target blockers aren't as good. Like perhaps now he'll 3-hit a Musketeer instead of 4-hitting Musketeers or something. But I believe in Dark Prince. I think we're going to see a lot more Dark Prince after this update. So the next change is something that I don't know how I feel about it, actually, because I like Bowler. So Bowler gets a very interesting change. Elixir cost is decreasing from 6 to 5. Hit points are decreasing by 7%, and damage are decreasing by 10%. So in a very easy way to describe it, it's sort of like Bowler is getting a level reduction, right? The hit point and damage nerf, it's getting reduced by a in-game level, but at the expense of a cheaper elixir cost. You've played Bowler to the top 4 of a Super Magical Cup along with other of your clanmates. What do you think about this in terms of how it affects Bowler?
It's going to be a very interesting time to test out how Bowler can work with siege decks now. The fact that there's been no change to his knockback effect means that he will still retain one of the key identifying characteristics that he held before this change, but reducing his elixir cost and making him a less tanky and less damaging card is really going to put him in a different spot in the game. Pretty much every time there's been a major rework of a card, and Musketeer is the last one that I can think of in which they reduced the elixir cost, or changed the elixir cost rather, it's been a reduction. And so I think that what they're trying to do here, what Supercell's trying to do, is make the card more versatile overall, make it easier for a defender to be able to respond to an attack in the opposite lane in which they place a Bowler proactively. And so with that additional elixir that you'll be able to hold on to, you won't be as forced to commit to that bowler attack. But conversely, you're not able to make as much of an investment in an offensive attack on either lane. Now, I found a lot of success using the Expo Bowler deck that was popularized by Turtwig Data, and I found that it was great to be able to throw that 6 elixir down, committing to one lane, knowing I was going to invest in an Expo right afterwards, and then going in for the kill. It's going to be a little bit more difficult to do that now that you're not able to put so much elixir into big tanky cards like the Bowler. But I think that since he still has that knockback effect, the description of the Bowler as a ranged Valkyrie, as you put it, I think is very apt, and he will still see some play and maybe even increased play as a result of this reworking of his elixir cost.
So for all the legendaries that got nerfed, it turns out that one legendary was due for a buff. 2, in fact. Lumberjack and Log, the 2 new legendaries introduced, are both getting pretty significant buffs. The Lumberjack is getting a Buffaroo Bonsai, a big ol' one here. 3 different changes are coming in. Lumberjack's foot speed is moving from fast to very fast. For context, Mini Pekka is fast, Fire Spirits are very fast. The hit speed is getting reduced to 0.7 seconds, making it one of the fastest attacking cards in the game, but its damage is decreasing by 23%. It took us a little bit to figure out what this actually means. We sat down and did the math on it. This works out to about a 15% DPS increase. Even though the attack damage is going down by 23%, the hit speed is going up by about 38%, so it works out as a damage buff overall in favor of the Lumberjack. What do you think about this, Woody?
This is a massive DPS increase for a card that already did quite a bit of damage. It was compared in a lot of cases to Mini Pekka. Didn't hit quite as hard, but I think that we are now going to see it take a lot of the benefits that the Knight currently has and being able to have a pretty fast swing speed while also doing a ton of damage, hitting like a truck and getting in on its target really quickly, running very fast now. I definitely think that Lumberjack is going to be a big card in the metagame now. The rage effect was not quite as strong as it needed to be in order to justify the use of a 4 elixir card, but now that we have something that's hitting a lot harder, even though he's hitting, okay, I take that back, he's not hitting harder, but he's hitting faster. And so, yeah. Right, as a result, he's going to be doing more damage overall. He'll chop through cheaper, quicker, small units a lot easier, and I think that we will see him being used a lot more in the metagame as a result.
I think the biggest buff to Lumberjack, to me, it's not even listed at all, is there's sort of an indirect hit point nerf or hit point buff that comes from having a faster both attack speed and move speed. So if you think about it, if I play something at the river and it runs to the tower, it takes some amount of tower shots based on how fast it moves. If it moves a little faster, you're taking less tower damage before dealing damage of your own. That's good. Also, with the faster attack speed, little road bumps like goblins, spear goblins, you're going to cut through them a lot quicker and be able to get back to the tower even faster. So even though Lumberjack still has less hit points than a Mini Pekka, it arguably might get to the tower more reliably than a Mini Pekka because of the faster hit speed and faster move speed.
He's going to work great in a lot of positions in which players aren't going to be using Miner anymore due to the unreliability of the targeting and the hit point reduction. I think that Lumberjack is going to get to the tower just about as quickly as a Miner will, and is going to be able to soak more damage, do more damage on his own, and provide that really crucial rage buff for any troops that are remaining behind. I think that he'll work really well with small chippy units like spear goblins, minions, to get a lot of damage onto that tower in a very short amount of time. It's going to be extremely punishing for decks that rely on things like Three Musketeers, because when you can make a 6 elixir push with Lumberjack and just a small little cohort of support troops to do a ton of damage onto the tower, you really are forcing cards, or rather players that use cards that are really expensive, to think twice about making such a big commitment to one lane.
I really expect, I hope Lumberjack aggro decks come into the meta, basically. Like, into the way that Hog Cycle was very popular, Lumberjaggro needs to be, is the next thing.
I like it.
And the Log, the Lumberjack's friend and rival, also gets a buff, although these are very interesting roundabout buffs. Not any change to the elixir cost or the damage, mostly what we would call, I guess, quality of life improvements. The cast time is decreased by 66%. That means that the time between you letting your finger off of the spell and it actually rolling down the field going to be significantly faster, probably more akin to like a zap where it just hits. And then the travel speed is increasing by 20%, so it rolls its full duration a little quicker. I'm looking forward to this because I think it makes things like Prince plus log, Mini Pekka plus log a little more viable, because the log will now travel faster and ahead of the charging troop. But overall, I don't know if the problem with the log to me was the cast time and the travel speed. What do you think?
I think that this is just an absolute straight buff to the log. There's almost no downside to being able to play a spell quickly. Zap has just been extremely versatile because almost exactly when you let go with your finger, that is when the spell hits. And so decreasing the cast time, making that log travel even further, is going to improve its versatility in a lot of cases in which you are trying to target a melee troop that's hitting one of your towers or units, and then also get that additional bonus by killing the support troops that are behind them. I think that we're going to see a lot more log and maybe a little bit less zap as a result, with this 2 elixir spell slot being opened up and allowing players a little bit more versatility in terms of the cards that they want to use.
I'm a little more pessimistic about this log change. Like, I think it's kind of neat, but I still expect there to be probably 1 or 2 more reductions to zap and buffs to log until it really becomes a fair balance. Now, here's a buff that I am really excited about. We've talked a little bit about whether or not Giant is overpowered in tournament play. I'm of the belief that Giant is actually fine. Giant is probably the only tank that is balanced in tournaments, and all the other tanks just need a little pick-me-up to get them to be balanced with Giant. So here we see Supercell taking a little buff to Gollum and Gollemite actually, to try to make that card a little more appealing for its 8 elixir cost. Golem is getting its attack damage and explosion death damage increased by 5%, hit points increased by a whole 1%. Golemites are getting their hit and damage increased by 8%, and hit points are being increased by 3.2%. Pretty small buffs to hit points, but pretty significant buffs to the hit and death damage. What do you think about this, Woody?
Well, the Golem does have a pretty slow swing speed, so I'm not really sure this increase to its damage dealt is going to matter a whole lot. You've talked before about suggestive buffs, and if there were ever a suggestive buff, it would be a 1% increase to hit points. So I think that this is a case in which Supercell is trying to suggest to players that there are other tanks in the game besides Giant, that there might be a role for Golem, as long as players aren't playing things like Inferno Tower and don't have any way to just nuke this Golem really quickly. Increasing its hit points, even just by slightly, and making it do more damage to its targets is going to make it just better overall, and might give it a place in the metagame. I wouldn't be too optimistic about it. The increase to the Golemites is also very welcome. They had recently, I guess it wasn't too recently, they had decreased the health and damage dealt by the Golemites in order to improve the Golem, and so just seeing a straight buff to both of these cards is going to give it a lot more lasting time on the board and present a threat that persists through the death of the original card, the Golem, and onto the Golemites now. It still forces you to deal with it, and it's something that's not easy to respond to without making a big elixir investment on defense.
I'm a little more optimistic because I think there's 2 key interactions that change with these, specifically the death damage increases. When the Golem explodes now, it should kill goblins. Goblins used to survive the Golem explosion, and to the same point, skeletons used to survive the Golemite explosions. So now I think with these changes, those really small, swarmy crapo troops that can hoard a Golem should die between each stage as opposed to persisting, and the goblins would survive the Golem explosion and then kill the Golemites. Now that won't happen. So I think that'll help. I agree the damage is not going to help that much, but it's something, right? I hope the Golem Poison deck comes back into the metagame because it's a really fun deck. It's fun to watch. It's fun to play and cast. And I definitely want to see more variety in the tanks used in tournament play. And the other epic tank sees quite a nice little buff here. Big Pekka, Mama Pekka, used to be one of probably the most popular tank in tournament played back in the days of the OP deck, right? With the Prince, double legendary, and the Pekka. But ever since the change to having level 13 commons, Pekka really fell out of favor and hasn't seen that much play. A 5% damage increase, I don't think is going to change that much about Pekka on offense because Pekka never really hit the tower, and I don't really see how a 5% damage increase is going to help it hit the tower, but I do see Pekka now as a very reasonable anti-tank tank where you play it after you see the giant coming down your lane in order to quickly kill the giant coming down your lane and then create a counter push of its own. Do you see any Pekka decks that you could play with this damage increase?
I absolutely do, and I think that you hit the nail exactly on the head. We've seen so many giant-based decks. We're seeing a buff now to Gollum, so I think that there's a good chance that we see more tanks coming in. And Pekka is a fantastic response to the really slow cards like that. It gives you the opportunity to invest a ton of elixir into making a really high DPS unit connect with those big tanks. It's something that's very resistant to poison, and even though it doesn't very often hit the tower, it would really just be kind of more of a win more situation by giving it that damage buff against towers. It really is going to get that damage dealt to enemy tanks and take them down a lot easier to make sure that you don't do any damage to your own arena towers.
Yeah, one last thing about the Pekka too is I just realized this, a buff to Dark Prince is indirectly a buff to Pekka. Pekka is one of the strongest cards against a double Prince charge. That 9 elixir charge gets countered by a single 7 elixir Pekka. That if we start to see more Prince decks in the metagame, then Pekka has not only a role, but is now stats-wise better than it was before. And the last of the changes is a buff to the original spawner card, Tombstone, all the way from Bone Pit, Arena 2. So Tombstone's a really interesting card. It's a card that has seen a lot of changes, probably one of the most changed cards throughout Clash Royale's history. Actually, good time to plug a series. If you're watching us on YouTube, which of course you are, make sure to check out the History of the Metagame series that we've been doing. Rainey and I have been recording old videos of past balance updates, past metagames, and it's fun to look back at the beta stages of the game when Tombstone was one of the most played cards. What made Tombstone so widely played was it used to spawn a ton more skeletons, both during its lifetime and when it blows up. A spawn speed increase increases the amount of skeletons spawned from, I think, 14 over the course of its lifetime to now maybe 18, 16, I have to do the math on it, but it's certainly a few more skeletons, and more importantly, less time between each skeleton. You play Tombstone in your mortar deck. What do you see happening with Tombstone here?
Well, I think that one of the big reasons that Tombstone was played early on in the game is that it's a great counter to Prince. Prince used to be one of the strongest cards in the game that everyone, if they got it from their initial magical chest, was sure to use it. I think that it is something that I think this change is something that will be very good for the game overall. The big problem that a lot of players had with Tombstone was that when it blew up, those 6 skeletons presented a very big roadblock for heavy hitting troops to be able to deal with.
You're talking real old-timey stuff, by the way. That's early February that it used to make six skeletons. But yeah, you're right.
So way back in the day, that's what it used to be. But I think that increasing the spawn speed to provide more of a constant trickle of skeletons will be great. It'll also help the Tombstone counter things like Furnace by popping all of the fire spirits that are incoming. And it will provide more of an insulation for other small kind of chippy-based attacks, attacks in which you need those little small troops to soak big hits from enemy units while your splash damage or your bowler or whatever else you're sending in, the Dark Prince maybe, gets the damage that he needs in time to be able to wipe out the defenders.
Yeah, in lieu of a mini Pekka nerf, which I'm kind of glad there wasn't a mini Pekka nerf, this seems like the sort of indirect nerf to mini Pekkas. Mini Pekka already has a hard time with Tombstone, and if Tombstone is seen more often, that will sort of naturally push people away from the mini Pekka because it will never be able to get down a Tombstone lane.
Absolutely. And this doesn't really change the Tombstone mini Pekka interaction in and of itself, but you're completely right that bringing Tombstone back into the metagame will make it much more difficult for mini Pekka players to be able to make the connections that they need to get the value out of that card.
So that does it for this balance update. It's been awesome having you, Woody. Make sure to check out more of Woody on Twitch, on YouTube, and of course on all of the great Reddit posts that you make for the community and in your subreddit r/CR Reddit Alpha.
Much appreciated. Thank you very much for bringing me on, Rumham. You guys do a fantastic job casting the Super Magical Cup, and it is my absolute pleasure to be able to participate in what is the greatest community-based Clash Royale tournament series. I want to give a quick shout out to my casting that I'll be doing for Northern Arena on September 3rd and 4th, this upcoming, I guess it'll be about a week or a week and a half from now. I hope that everyone will tune in to watch that series. I think it's going to be some great gameplay.
Make sure to check it out. And see you next time. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube and check us out on Twitch at twitch.tv/SuperMagicalCup. Live tournaments are every Saturday at noon Pacific time.